morning, Southport family. Excited to be with you guys for another episode of the Daily Read. Sorry, I'm here again with I just want to show you, because I think you guys are going to think this is cool. If not, just bear with me. I think it's awesome. We have my mint garden over here. Actually, we've got mint over here. Got a little lavender that still hasn't bloomed yet, and some rosemary that's going to be rolling here soon. But that being said, let's talk about the reading for the day. So 1 Corinthians chapter 12 is our daily reading for the day. Now, here's the thing that I think is important to consider. When you're weighing out what Paul is saying, there's this real, I think, temptation to read it, especially if you've been around the church for any amount of time. So let's say maybe you have an experience like mine. I grew up in church, and so a lot of my reading of the Bible can sometimes be influenced by my past experiences with it, both good and bad. Mostly good, obviously. I was really fortunate to have a lot of great teachers. I actually grew up at First Baptist just up the road here in Hodgenville. Had a lot of just super awesome teachers that helped shape me into the person I am today. And so just, again, really grateful for them. But if you had an experience like mine, you might be tempted in the same way to read the stories of the Bible and see them as just that, individual stories. And 1 Corinthians chapter 12 is actually a really good example of what I'm referring to. It's the chapter that deals with what we would know as like the different parts of the body illustration, right? So I'm sure you've heard that maybe even in the business world, not just necessarily related to church, but hey, listen, some of us are eyes, some of us are ears, some of us are toes, whatever it might be. And while that's a really good illustration that can talk about teamwork and all these types of different things, I think we have to be careful to always read the text that we're going to be reading in its original context. So a quick review before we get into the specifics of today, and we're going to keep this really short, okay? 1 Corinthians was Paul's letter to the church at Corinth. This church was struggling a lot with just the amount of teamwork breaking down. I mean, so essentially the church stopped functioning like a family. People were prioritizing themselves above everything else. There were people who were taking advantage of the Lord's Supper and getting drunk off of it and eating all the food before other people could get there who still had to work. There were situations where people were choosing their favorite teacher based off of just things that ultimately didn't matter. There was crazy sexual immorality. It was just a weird time. However, by the time we get to 1 Corinthians 12, we enter into this place where Paul is kind of encouraging the church to stay on course. So he's given the rebuke to the church already, and now we're in a place where he is saying, hey, listen, let's stay the course. Let's stay focused on the gospel. In fact, there's this phrase that he uses of, hey, listen, at the end of the day, the church family is a lot like a body. And then this might enter into the familiar illustration I referred to just a second ago. We got to be careful. Don't read it maybe like you've always read it. Consider its context. Paul is saying to the church in Corinth, he's saying, listen, understand, it's okay if your spiritual gifts differ from someone else's. I mean, think about it right now. We're living through a global pandemic, and we have got brave men and women. I mean, think about it. I mean, if you've watched the news at all and you've seen just these heroic acts of what's going down in Manhattan, like literally there's someone I'm connected with on Facebook who is not working at a hospital in New York, but literally has volunteered to go and serve there in the midst of this global pandemic. And so that being said, there's this huge act of sacrifice that she is making. And there are countless others. I think of my brother, who's a police sergeant, who is continuing to serve his community through this pandemic. We've got essential workers, state workers, we've got employees, all these different people who are sacrificing for us. We've got restaurant workers, we've got like hardware store people, we've got farmers, we've got all these people who are functioning. And even though some of us are being told, hey, listen, stay safe at home or some other iteration of that, depending upon where you live. The reality is we've got other people who are going to bat for us and helping carry really our communities at large across our nation and our world on for us while we try to fight this thing. And that's an interesting illustration to come into what Paul is talking about in 1 Corinthians 12. He's saying, listen, it's okay if you have a different gifting than someone else. In fact, it's a good thing. Paul says, imagine if we all were an eye. For the purpose of this illustration in 1 Corinthians 12. Imagine if we're all an eye. He's like, where would the sense of hearing be? If we were all an ear, where would the sense of smell be? And so the beautiful thing, and I hope is a good encouragement to you today is, if you are feeling right now, in this moment, you haven't been able to go out because we're doing good social distancing, we're helping fight this thing together, and you're staying home, and you might feel like right now you don't have a purpose. Listen, you do. You do. You might not be on the front lines like a healthcare worker is. You might not be working in a grocery store to help continue feeding the families in your community. But the reality is that God uses all of his people. He uses them in beautiful ways that we might not ever even know about. I mean, think about it for just a minute. I love this John Piper quote. He says, listen, God is always doing 10,000 things in your life, and you're only aware of like 3 of them. And so think of the ways right now that God could be using us, even staying at home, being safe, social distancing away, doing our part to help slow the spread of the virus. And we can spend time in prayer. We can send an encouraging text message. We can make a phone call. We can write a letter. We can do all these different things to encourage the saints, to encourage those who aren't even Christians, that Jesus has given us a hope. And so I want you to think about that. When you read 1 Corinthians 12 today, it's in our Bible reading. And Paul's telling the church at Corinth there, hey, listen, it's okay. It's okay if you don't have the same gifting as somebody else. It's all of us doing our part for the good of the entire body of Christ. I want you to think about that. I want you to think about maybe what can you do, even while staying at home, to encourage the body, to go to bat in prayer, asking the Lord to do what seems like is impossible. But what we know from Luke 1:37 is that impossible is not in God's dictionary. It's not even in his vocabulary. It's not. For nothing is impossible with God. That being said, we love you guys. We'll see you tomorrow with 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I think it's going to sound super familiar to you guys. That being said, love you. We'll see you tomorrow. Have an excellent rest of your day.